So about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, when I was in college, I was part of a group called the Navigators. You may have heard of them. They're like a missions agency sort of thing. And so they're spread out across a bunch of campuses. And so Michigan State had this group called the MSU Navigators. How about that? And so we did like a weekly Bible study and then got together on the weekends and did stuff. And so I was the president, the student president of this group, and I led all the Bible studies. And so I thought I was hot stuff, man. I was. I thought I was. The story will turn, and I'm not the hero of the story, so don't worry. And so one year we did, it was a fall, we did a weekend retreat. And so we drove probably the east side of Indiana. I would imagine it was north of here, but coming from Michigan, it was quite a ways south. And it was just a weekend retreat, a bunch of college students from all the Navigators at various campuses across the Northeast, basically. And so there was a lot of ultimate frisbee, a lot of that. Like, I was so tired, but it was awesome. Which, side note, probably the greatest sport in the whole wide world, just saying. And so we played a lot of that, and I had a good friend there. She was just awesome. And she happened to bring another friend, and this guy, for the sake of anonymity, his name, he was Kevin, all right? Now, I didn't like Kevin, and here's why. It's not for a good reason. See, Kevin, right, so I'm used to being like the leader, sort of in charge, like, the alpha dog, and not like having that spot because like I was entitled to it just because people put me there. And so all of a sudden, Kevin comes in, and he's better than me, right? Uh-oh. See, and it was, of course I didn't say it out loud, but this is all going through my head like, oh my, he's like, this dude loves Jesus more than I do, which of course is ironic with the thoughts going through my head. And he was better at Frisbee, which didn't help at all either, right? But I could tell, man, he had a genuine Christian character about him that exceeded his age. And it was like all of a sudden he became my competition, right? You ever do that? And so, whereas I should have been like, oh my gosh, there's another, like, not that, my other friends weren't strong Christians, but this guy was, he was above average, if you can say that about Christianity. Y'all know what I mean, right? And so all of a sudden I had this competition, and in my head there was like this resentment building, but I knew it was wrong, and so I'm like trying to become friends, and yet at the same time like wrestling with this in my head. And so I tell that story to give you a feel for that's sort of what the disciples are doing. See, they're going back and forth about who's the greatest, right? No, I'm the greatest. And then later on in chapter 9, there's this other guy who was out casting out demons in Jesus' name, and they stop him. They're like, whoa, hey, you're not one of us. Back off, buddy. Like, whoa, this is our turf, man. You're crowding into my turf, right? Just like I was with this other guy who was clearly a phenomenal young man, and yet I'm resenting him because he's better than me. That's sort of what's going on in our text this morning. We feel this tension of like these disciples of Jesus who are supposed to be looking, feeling, acting like Jesus with humility, and yet they're in this competition, right? Sort of this spitting match, this macho disciple spitting match sort of thing about who's the best. And it's foolish, and Jesus he's gonna have some words about this. So if you got your Bibles, go to chapter 9, verse 30. So chapter 9, verse 30, or you can just look on the screen. It says, they being Jesus and the disciples, they left that place, and they passed through Galilee. Now, Jesus, he didn't want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. So he's just taking some time away from the crowds to teach his crew. And he said to them, here we go again, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. All right, and so they look at 32, but they didn't understand what he meant, and in fact, they were afraid to ask him about it, which is curious, right? Because up to this point, they're sort of, they're not really, they'll ask him anything, right? Peter just sort of blurts out what's on his mind, but in this, it says they're afraid to ask him, right? And so again, if you were here on Thursday, what we did is we just stressed how absurd this notion is of the Son of Man, which is sort of, in one sense, it's a human title, but if you look at Daniel 7:13, it's this messianic title, right? And so if I can put that into perspective, the analogy I used Thursday is imagine, right? So we've got a presidential race coming up, okay? So imagine that this superstar candidate comes out of nowhere, right? His name is Johnson, just for the sake of a name. All right, and so Johnson, he's just this nobody, right? He was a mechanic. But all of a sudden, he comes out of nowhere, and he's breaking the rule. He's running in both primaries. So he's running the Republican and Democratic primary, and he's getting, right, and everybody loves him. He wins, right? So he wins both primaries, gets elected into office because he doesn't even have anyone to run against, and he still gets 95% of the popular vote. And the only people that don't like him are like senators and congressmen, right? The people he's sort of crowding out, all right? But imagine on the campaign trail, right? And you're in Johnson, you're like in his campaign, right? You're set up for a nice seat in his cabinet, right? So maybe you're SecDef, maybe you're Secretary of State. You're getting set up for a nice cushy spot, right? But along the way, Johnson starts saying these things like, guys, when I get to president, Congress, they're going to kill me. But it has to be that way. Right, the House and the Senate, they're going to rise up against me, and the Supreme Court, they're going to plot, they're going to kill me, guys. We'd be like, well, no, Johnson, and I'm going to let them do it, by the way. We'd be like, Johnson, what are you doing, buddy? Like, I don't think that's right, man. Like, you're not. If you die, then game over. We just go back to the status quo, right? You're supposed to come in, reform this broken political system that everybody's whining about. Like, come on, John, you got to fix this, right? And then John's like, again, he says, no, they're going to kill me. See, I'm going to be handed over, betrayed into the hands of men, and they're going to kill me. But after 3 days, I'll rise again. And so we would be like, it doesn't make any sense to our heads, right? We just can't understand. We have no idea how would dying help solve anything, right? It's this strange thing. That's the situation the disciples are in. Jesus is saying these things like, yeah, by the way, I am the Christ, but I'm going to die. See, because the Christ is supposed to be like this king, this presidential figure who's going to come and fix everything that's broken in the world. He's supposed to come in, be this hero who will kick out the Romans and save the day. Right? And then Jesus keeps saying, by the way, I'm going to save the day, but I'm going to do it through death. And it just doesn't make any sense to them. And so we see here again in 9:30 through 32, Jesus again says, I'm going to die, but after 3 days I'll rise. 32, but they didn't understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask. I don't think they're afraid so much of Jesus chewing them out for asking a question. I think they're afraid because they know the answer. You know what I mean? Like, you ever suppress a truth because you don't want to face it? Right? It's a defense mechanism. We all do it. Right? And so they're afraid because they're starting to get a glimpse of, if he dies, that means we're going to face some pretty heavy persecution too. And so I think they're not afraid so much to ask Jesus, they're afraid to hear his answer. They're afraid to hear that they might have to follow him to the cross as well. Right? Anybody find themselves in those shoes? I do. I'm not sure I want to know the right thing in every situation because it's going to be hard, and I don't always want to do the hard thing. I'd much rather rationalize it away or sort of, just kind of cradle up in my hole of naivety or ignorance and not have to face hard decisions. I think that's where the disciples are here. And so 33, Jesus has just made this command, right? In the last chapter, he said, take up your cross and follow me. And then in 33, it says they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the way here? Of course, he knows. What you guys were saying something on the way here? What were you saying? Tell me. But they kept quiet because on the way, they had argued about who was the greatest. And so Jesus then, he does what I told the kids. So he sits down, he calls the 12, and he said, if anyone wants to be first, then he's got to be the last. If you want to be first, you become the servant of all. So he took a little kid, he had him stand among them, and he takes him in his arms, gives him a big hug, and he said, yeah, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name, welcome me. Whoa. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. Whoa. You see what he's saying? So he's saying, listen, you guys are arguing about who's going to be the greatest, right? Just like I was in my story, right? I'm thinking about, no, I want to be the greatest. And this guy, he's coming in, he's sort of taking some of my glory, like I got to, right? And this type of, I know I'm the best. No, I'm the best, right? And Jesus says, you want the best one? It's the servant of all, right? I mean, Jesus, he is the epitome of this, right? I mean, he is servanthood encapsulated. I mean, he is the ultimate in servanthood, right? That God himself would come and serve and die for his own creation, right? So he says, if you want to be the greatest, you become like one of these little kids. And why does he pick a kid? Because kids in the ancient world, they're actually similar to today. They're not given high social status. They're sort of tolerated. And of course, I mean, it's not like parents didn't love their kids, right? But in society at large, kids are sort of tolerated, but they're not given this high standing. So Jesus picks an example of a human being who was of low social status, right? And he says, hey, if you accept one of these, like nobodies, right? And so you could expand this out to maybe he's picking a drunkard or a drug addict or someone like the harlot from John 4, right? Whoever accepts one of these nobodies, whoever accepts one of these kids, it's as if you accepted me. And not even that. It's as if you accepted the one who sent me, right? So by accepting to give a cup of water or, a little bit of pocket change or to take like an orphan into your home or whatever, it's as if you're serving God himself, as if you've just given your pocket change to God himself or taken God himself into your home, right? And so these people are arguing about who's the greatest, and first of all, you become the greatest. Well, I mean, it's sort of a nonsensical. How can you be the greatest in the kingdom of God when we're all saved by grace alone? But still, you become the greatest by being the greatest servant, by being the lowest, by denying yourself the most and serving others. And then on top of that, when you do that, like when you take yourself out of the equation and you serve the least of these, then you've just become like almost highest in God's kingdom. Does that make sense? Do you see what's going on here? Yeah, maybe. Right? So whoever wants to be first, you got to be last, and the servant of all. So if you want the place of highest status, then you assume the place of lowest status. That's what Jesus is getting at. He's taking everything we know in the world about social structure and hierarchy and status, and he's totally flipping it upside down. And so he says, if you want to be the most respected, or you want to be the best you can be, you be the best servant you can be. Whereas everything in our culture says, no, it's going to happen. You got to get a good education, then you'll get a good job, you'll have a lot of money, and then you can keep up with the Joneses. You can have a nice house, you can have nice clothes, your family will behave well. Then you'll be respected, right? Then everyone will think highly of you. Or for some reason, there's this group of people who think that by getting a political office, that people will like them. I don't think does anyone like Congress? Right? I pick on them a lot just because they're such easy targets. And they're at the center of our society, right? But Jesus is saying, if you want to be the greatest, it's not by becoming president. That's not, God's not impressed, right? You want to become the greatest, come in here on a Wednesday with a mop and a broom and, clean up. Or you want to be the greatest, get back there with the kids and teach a kid's Sunday school lesson. Or you want to be the greatest, well, take some food to some other people, right? You want to be the greatest, just out of nowhere, just pay somebody's phone bill or their electric bill. You want to be the greatest, you serve. Or you want to be the greatest, then, make a pot of coffee at work, right? Just for your coworkers, just because, right? Just serve. Simple stuff, right? That is what impresses God. That is what makes God say, that's mine. See them? That one's mine. Right? That's my child. Right? Isn't that cool? Seriously, you genuinely affect the emotions of God. I fully believe that. Right? But it's not, Jesus is saying, it's not going to be by attaining this high class. God does not give a rip if you have a prestigious job, if society at large thinks you're awesome. Right? He doesn't care. He doesn't care what He's not impressed by your job or your lack of a job or by your bank account or your lack of a bank account. God's not impressed. But you serve well, right? You get over yourself. You love others well. God's impressed. I think he smiles. For real, I think he really smiles, right? When we do things well, right? When you say, you know what, I could spend this $5 on me, but I'm going to spend it on my wife, or I'm going to spend it on my son, right? I think God's impressed by that. It's something little, but when your kids do something like that, isn't it the greatest thing in the world when without asking, without prodding, without anything, a small child gives something up for his brother or his sister? Isn't that the coolest thing in the world? Right? Because it's so rare, because kids, they just haven't had enough training, right? They're not mature enough. Everything in them is focused toward themselves. And when they get outside themselves, right, and they just say, man, you know what? I'm going to give this to my brother, right? The sibling, they get over the sibling rivalry. I think that is the coolest thing in the world. I think God does too, right? When we little people, right, compared to God, when we get over ourselves and we say, I'm gonna serve my neighbor, right? Whether it's something simple or epic, I think God's impressed. I think he loves that. I think he gets whatever the equivalent of an endorphin rush in God's body. I don't know. I have no idea how to conceptualize that, right? I think it makes him happy. And so Jesus is saying, whereas disciples, they're arguing about I'm the best. No, I'm the best. I get to be at his right hand. No, I've followed him 14 steps and you only followed him 13, right? No, I threw out 14 demons. You've only thrown out 12, right? Now I'm the best. Or no, I healed 4 people and you only healed 2. I'm the best, right? I think that's what's going on. And Jesus is saying, see that little kid over there? Take care of that kid. Then I'll be impressed, right? So whoever wants to be the best is is the best servant. That's what impresses God, is when we get over ourselves and we care about other people and we care about him. When we take ourselves out of the center and we put God at the center. So, if I can bring this around and get at my main point. Just like last week, our main problem is that we are born with ourself at the center. We are all born self-centered, right? So if I put a bullseye on the target and I can somehow project your brain onto there, it's your smiling face at the center, right? We always put ourselves first. That's just the way we are made. You look at the natural world, that's how the world functions. We live in a broken world, we are broken creatures, and everything functions for self-service, right? It's how every animal works, it's how every human being works, right? We're just born that way, and Jesus is trying to pound into our skulls somehow, some way. He's saying, look at me, like I did not come to serve myself. I came to die. I came here to die. I am not at the center. I have never been at the center. The Father and the Spirit have always been at the center. And then the Spirit is always saying, I am not at the center. The Father and the Son are always at the center. And then the Father saying, it's not me. No, it's the Son and the Spirit, right? And so creation is not intended for everyone to be self-centered. That's our primary problem. And Jesus is trying to get us to see that. And so if you can get yourself out of the center and put Jesus at the center, that's greatness. Like, that's true greatness. That is what God looks at and he says, man, I want more of that. That's what puts the smile on the face of God. Like, for real. Like, he really cares. And he really gets happy when you do this. Right? When one sinner repents, it's like heaven throws a party. I mean, let that inspire you. Let that motivate you. And just like I said before, the gospel is that you are so flawed, like that Jesus had to die for you. Like, do you get that? Like, you're not awesome, okay? I'm not awesome. I'm not great. Like, we are horribly flawed. Right? We live a life that is 95%, right, on a good day, all about us. Right? And Jesus, so flawed are we that Jesus had to go through the cross to save us. And yet the flip side is that you are so cherished. Like, you are so valued. You are so cherished that he was glad to do it. Right, that looking back on it, it's not like Jesus is I regret going through the cross, or he looks back on it as like this sad day in history that he's got PTS from the cross. No, I think he looks back and he smiles. Look at what I accomplished on that day. Like, you are so cherished that he was glad to go through it for you. So, like, get over yourself. Like, take yourself out of the center and put Jesus and neighbor at the center. That is where true joy is found. That is where true happiness is found. That is where true wealth is found. And so I'll end with this. If like me, that is hard for you, and you hear that and you say, I want to believe that, like, I want to so bad, but I love myself so much, right? I'm so attached to myself, and it is so hard, right? And what if I get there and it's a lie? I mean, what if I get there and I go through something really bad, and there's no happiness, there's no joy that follows? I mean, what if you're wrong? Like, is servanthood, is that really, like, are you sure, Jesus? Are you really sure? Right? If you're there, can I encourage you with the passage I skipped today? Right? So right before this, the Son of Man is going to be killed. There's this story, right? There's a father, Okay, the father, his son is possessed by a demon, and Jesus' disciples come, and they can't help him. Right? They try and cast this demon out, and they fail. Right? They fail. Now, before, if you remember earlier in Mark, I want to say chapter 6, Jesus sends out the 12, gives them authority over demons, and they come back successful. Right? And so before, his disciples had this ability, and now either this demon is of a different kind or something, I don't know. The point is they fail. And so if you're that father, right, these people are like your last hope, and they fail. And so he comes to Jesus, and he begs him, like, can you help me? Please, can you, if you are able, if you can, please help me. And Jesus responds, if I can. Of course I can. All things are doable for those who believe. And so the father, he comes back with, listen, I believe, but help my unbelief. Like there's a little bit there, but I need help to get over that hump. Like I believe, but please help my unbelief. Those are the greatest words, perhaps, like ever. I love that father who says that. Right? His son is being there tormented. He's been tormented since childhood, and he's just at his last rope, and he says, Jesus, if you can. Jesus says, yeah, I can if you believe, and he says, I can, I do, but help my unbelief. Right? If you're there this morning, then you're in a healthy spot. You're okay. That's where I'm at too. Right? Because this stuff is hard. This challenge that Jesus lays down, that I have to die in order to live. I don't want to die. I don't like dying. Everything in me screams, don't die. And Jesus is saying, man, you got to get over yourself. If you want to live, then get over yourself. If you want glory, stop seeking it and pick up a broom. If you want glory, stop seeking it and take out your wallet. Or if you want glory, stop seeking it and put on your shoes and go help somebody. And that's hard for me. That's hard to get into my brain because I get tired and I don't want to serve other people. I want to serve myself. I don't want to spend money on other people. I want to buy stuff for me. I don't want to spend my energy on other people. I want to do what I want to do. But Jesus holds out this hope, and I see it, and I'm like, yes, but I'm like on the ledge, and right? Help my unbelief. I believe, but help my unbelief. That's a good spot to be. All right? And Jesus, man, he's right. He gets you. All right? He gets that. And he will help your unbelief, just like he did with this father. Because the father says this, and he heals the little boy. Right? So your problem is that you are stuck on you. And Jesus gives you a solution. It's to get stuck on him. It's hard. And so if you believe, but you're struggling, then your prayer is simply, I believe, but help my unbelief. Right? And just beg Jesus to help you, and he will. And he will. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we come before you this morning, at least I do, as one who hears this message and who embraces it, and I want to embrace it with everything in me. I want to follow you to the ends of the earth. I want to do whatever you want me to do, and yet I don't. I'm terrified to do it, and just like the disciples, you tell them that you have to die, and they're afraid to ask you what that means. I'm there, and I don't really want to ask you. I don't really want to ask you what it is you want me to do, because I think it's going to hurt, and I don't think it will lead me into joy. Everything in me screams the opposite. And yet, you tell me something different. And so I'm torn between these two worlds, and I just beg you, help my unbelief. Help my unbelief that I might follow you to the ends of the earth, wherever you would lead me, that I would give everything for you because you are better than me. You are better than everything I've got. You're better, and you're worth it. And please convince me that this is true. I beg you, help my unbelief. I love you, Jesus. I thank you for all that you are. And with everything I can muster, I trust you. In your name I pray. In your powerful name I pray. Amen.